A single glass of champagne. That's all Audrey Sterling wanted to feel normal again, to feel like the woman she was before her life became a gilded cage. Standing in the shadow of the grand ballroom at the Metropolitan Innovators Gala, she watched her millionaire husband, Jonathan, charm the city's elite. But her invisibility was shattered when his mistress, Victoria Roche, cornered her. With a voice as sharp as the diamonds around her neck, Victoria whispered insults meant to break her. But they had no idea of the secret Audrey was hiding, or the man who was about to walk through those doors and detonate a bomb in the middle of their perfect, deceitful world. This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of a woman reclaiming her power in the most spectacular way imaginable. The air in the grand ballroom of the Cipriani felt heavy, thick with the scent of money, ambition, and expensive perfume. It was the annual Metropolitan Innovators Gala, a night where New York's tech titans, venture capitalists, and media moguls gathered to congratulate each other on shaping the future. For Audrey Sterling, it felt less like a celebration and more like a beautifully decorated prison. She stood near a marble column, the cool stone a welcome contrast to the nervous heat rising within her. Her dress, a simple but elegant deep navy silk gown by the row, felt like armor. It was her own choice, purchased with her own money. A small act of rebellion in a life dictated by her husband. Jonathan Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Corp., was across the room holding court. He was magnetic, a sun around which others orbited. With his tailored Tom Ford suit, a confident smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a Patek Philippe watch glinting on his wrist, he was the very picture of success. Audrey used to be mesmerized by that charisma. Now she saw the hollowness behind it. She saw the countless late nights at the office, the scent of a different woman's perfume on his shirts, the emotional distance that had grown into a chasm between them. Their Fifth Avenue penthouse, with its panoramic views of Central Park, had become a silent battleground. The last few months had been a slow, agonizing death of a marriage. The final blow had come 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a dramatic fight, but a quiet, chilling conversation in their sterile white kitchen. "I'm not happy, Audrey," he had said, not looking at her, his focus on stirring a spoonful of sugar into his espresso. "And you think I am?" she had replied, her voice barely a whisper. "This arrangement isn't working for me anymore." He continued, as if discussing a corporate merger. "I need more. More passion. More excitement." He never said the name Victoria Roche, but he didn't have to. Audrey had seen the credit card statements for bouquets sent to a Soho address, the reservations at restaurants he'd once taken her to, the weekend trips to the Hamptons, while he claimed to be in investor meetings in Boston. Victoria was a social media influencer, turned brand strategist, a woman whose entire existence seemed curated for public consumption. She was everything Audrey wasn't, loud, brazen, and desperate for the spotlight. Audrey had simply nodded. There was nothing left to fight for. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," she had said, the words feeling foreign and heavy in her mouth. She had packed a bag that night and moved into a small, elegant suite at the Carlisle Hotel, a place her mother had always loved, seeking solace in its old-world quiet. The most painful part was the secret she held close, a secret that was growing inside her day by day. She was 6 months pregnant, a surprise, a miracle, after years of quiet heartbreak and specialists who had gently told them it was unlikely. She had discovered it right as the chasm between her and Jonathan had become unbridgeable. How could she tell him? How could she bring a child into this cold, broken home? He hadn't even noticed the slight curve of her belly, the way she'd stopped drinking wine at dinner, the fatigue that clung to her like a shroud. He was too busy with his passion and excitement, so she had kept it to herself. It was her secret, her hope, her fear. Tonight, she wasn't here as Mrs. Jonathan Sterling. She was here as a guest of the Gala's charitable foundation, for which she had done volunteer work for years long before Jonathan's first billion. It was a step towards reclaiming her own identity. She needed to prove to herself that she could exist in this world without being his shadow. She took a slow sip of sparkling water, the bubbles fizzing on her tongue, and tried to ignore the weight of the stares she could feel, but not see. The whispers were like snakes in the grass. "That's Jonathan Sterling's wife. I hear they're having trouble. She looks so plain next to him." She watched Jonathan laugh at something a portly investor said, his arm casually draped around the back of a chair. It was then that she saw her. Victoria Roche, slinking through the crowd like a panther. She wore a garish fire-engine red gown with a slit so high it defied gravity. Her diamonds were bigger, her makeup bolder, her laugh louder. She was a caricature of wealth, and she was heading directly for Jonathan. He saw her, and a flicker of something annoyance, pleasure crossed his face before he smoothed it back into a mask of polite charm. Audrey's heart began to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had wanted to be invisible tonight, but she had a sinking feeling that Victoria had other plans. She was a predator who had scented weakness, and she was moving in for the kill. Victoria Roche didn't just walk. She made an entrance. Every step was calculated to draw the eye, every glance a performance. As she reached Jonathan's circle, she placed a perfectly manicured hand adorned with a gaudy canary diamond ring on his arm. It was a gesture of ownership, a public branding. Jonathan didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He simply smiled the politician's smile he used to placate and dismiss. Audrey felt a cold dread wash over her. She turned, intending to slip away towards the terrace, to find a corner where she could breathe air, not choked with hypocrisy. But it was too late. "Well, well, if it isn't the ghost of Gala's past." Victoria's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. She had detached herself from Jonathan's side and was now standing directly in front of Audrey. A few people nearby fell silent, their eyes darting between the two women, sensing the impending drama. "Victoria," Audrey said, her voice even betraying none of the turmoil inside. "I didn't realize you were a benefactor of the Children's Literacy Fund." Victoria let out a short, sharp laugh. "Oh, darling, I'm a benefactor of many things. Let's just say I prefer to invest in people who have a future, not ones who are relics." The insult was precise, designed to cut deep. Audrey's simple, timeless dress, her understated pearl earrings, her quiet demeanor, Victoria was framing it all as obsolete. "It's brave of you to show your face," Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for those nearby to hear. She let her eyes sweep over Audrey's navy gown with theatrical disdain. "Did you get lost on your way to a PTA meeting? This is the big leagues, honey. People here expect a certain presentation. Jonathan has an image to maintain, you know. He needs a partner who shines, not one who fades into the wallpaper." Audrey's hand instinctively went to her stomach, a protective gesture over the life she was carrying. Her secret. Victoria's eyes followed the movement, a cruel, knowing smirk playing on her lips. But she misinterpreted the gesture entirely. "Oh, I see," Victoria purred. "Trying to hold on to the last shreds of your dignity. It's pathetic. He's a titan, a king, and a king needs a queen, not a housekeeper." Each word was a poisoned dart. Audrey could feel the blood draining from her face. She looked past Victoria, searching for Jonathan. He was watching. He stood about 20 feet away, a glass of whiskey in his hand, a passive observer at his own public execution. He saw the confrontation, saw the humiliation in his wife's eyes, and he did nothing. A flicker of a smile even touched his lips. He was enjoying this. He was letting his pit bull off the leash to do the dirty work for him. That realization was colder and more painful than any of Victoria's barbs. It wasn't just that their marriage was over. It was that he held her in such utter contempt. He wanted her not just gone, but broken. "You know," Victoria said, leaning in closer, her cloying perfume making Audrey feel nauseous. "I almost feel sorry for you. You tried to play the game, but you never understood the rules. The rules are that men like Jonathan get bored. They outgrow their first wives. It's the natural order of things. You were a comfortable sutter home, but he's ready to build a palace, and I am the architect." Someone in the crowd coughed nervously. Another person shifted their weight. The silence was deafening. This was more than just gossip. It was a public shaming. Audrey felt trapped, the grand ballroom shrinking around her, the air crackling with Morton Thompson's and other investors' pitying stares. Her hands trembled slightly, and she clasped her small Bottega Veneta clutch to still them. She had to say something. She couldn't just stand here and be eviscerated. She opened her mouth, but her throat was dry. What could she say? Arguing would be undignified. Crying would be a victory for them. Victoria, sensing her advantage, went for the final brutal thrust. "Just do everyone a favor, Audrey. Go home. Disappear quietly. It's the most graceful thing you have left to do. Don't make him force you out. It will be so much messier. He's moved on. The world has moved on. You are yesterday's news." With a final triumphant smirk, Victoria turned on her stiletto heel and sauntered back towards Jonathan, who greeted her with a low murmur and a guiding hand on the small of her back. He didn't even glance in Audrey's direction. It was as if she had already ceased to exist. Audrey stood frozen, the echoes of Victoria's words ringing in her ears. Yesterday's news. Relic. Housekeeper. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing brand on her skin. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her, pitying her. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. This was a mistake. Coming here was a terrible mistake. She had wanted to reclaim her life, but she had only succeeded in having its failure thrown in her face in the most public way possible. She turned to leave her only thought to escape, to run back to the quiet anonymity of her hotel suite and never show her face in this city again. And then the massive oak doors of the ballroom swung open. A hush fell over the room, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The music seemed to fade. All heads turned towards the entrance, drawn by an invisible magnetic pull. Audrey turned too, her tear-filled eyes blinking in confusion. What now? What other fresh hell was this night about to deliver? Standing in the grand entryway was Daniel Peterson. If Jonathan Sterling was the sun, hot, dazzling, and demanding to be the center of the universe, Daniel Peterson was the moon. He possessed a cooler, more profound gravity. As CEO of Phoenix Dynamics, a rival tech firm specializing in sustainable energy and AI, he was one of the few men in the city who didn't orbit Jonathan. He occupied his own distinct and increasingly powerful celestial sphere. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a custom Brioni suit, that spoke of quiet confidence rather than loud arrogance. His presence commanded attention without begging for it. But it wasn't Daniel who caused the collective gasp that rippled through the ballroom. It was the woman on his arm. It was Audrey Sterling. Not the pale, shaken woman, standing by the marble column, but a vision of her. This Audrey was radiant. Her hair was styled in elegant waves. Her makeup was flawless, and she wore a stunning emerald green gown that clung to her figure in a way that was both sophisticated and breathtaking. The deep green was a stark contrast to the navy she was currently wearing, a vibrant declaration of life against a backdrop of sorrow. And the gown did not hide, but rather celebrated the gentle, unmistakable swell of her pregnancy. She walked with a poise and serenity that captivated everyone. Her hand rested gently on her stomach, not in a gesture of protection, but of proud maternal grace. She looked not at the gawking crowd, but at Daniel, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips as he leaned down to whisper something in her ear. They moved together with an easy, familiar intimacy that spoke volumes. The Audrey by the column, the real Audrey, felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. She watched this impossible scene unfold as if it were a movie. It was her, yet it wasn't. It was a dream, a hallucination, brought on by stress and humiliation. Then she looked down at her own navy dress, felt the hard edge of her clutch in her trembling hands, and the illusion shattered. This was real. But how? The crowd was a sea of confused, whispering faces. They looked from the Audrey standing alone and defeated to the radiant, pregnant Audrey entering on the arm of a powerful CEO. It was a glitch in the matrix of high society. Jonathan Sterling, who had been basking in the glow of his public triumph over his wife, froze mid-sip, his whiskey glass hovering near his lips. His face for the first time that night lost its carefully constructed mask of confident charm. His eyes widened first in disbelief, then in confusion, and finally in a slow dawning, thunderous rage. He stared at the entering couple. Then his gaze snapped to the woman by the column. His wife, the one he had just allowed to be publicly filleted. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, struggled to process the impossible data before him. Victoria Roche was equally stunned. Her victorious smirk melted into a slack-jawed gape. Her eyes, wide with shock, darted between the two Audreys. The color drained from her face, leaving her look garish and clown-like under the ballroom's chandeliers. The architect of the palace suddenly found her blueprints turning to dust. The radiant Audrey finally lifted her gaze from Daniel and scanned the room. Her eyes, calm and clear, swept past the shocked faces, past Victoria's horror, past Jonathan's fury, and settled on her, double the heartbroken woman in the navy dress. And she smiled, a sad, knowing, empathetic smile. Then the impossible happened. The Audrey in the green dress raised her hand and waved a small, almost imperceptible gesture of acknowledgement and solidarity. It was in that moment that the real Audrey understood. Her mind reeled, piecing together fragments of conversations, a strange phone call from a week ago, a favor she had dismissed as trivial. "I need you to trust me," a voice had said, and now she understood. This wasn't a hallucination. It was a masterfully orchestrated coup de théâtre. The woman in the green dress was not Audrey Sterling. It was her younger sister, Rose. Rose, the actress, the chameleon who had spent years honing her craft in London's West End. Rose, who bore such a striking resemblance to her that they were often mistaken for twins. Rose, who was also, by a remarkable twist of fate, 7 months pregnant. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with dizzying speed. Daniel Peterson wasn't just Jonathan's rival. He was an old university friend of hers and Rose's, a friend she had reconnected with in her darkest hour. A friend who had listened, who had been appalled by Jonathan's cruelty, and who had apparently conspired with her sister to stage the most dramatic intervention in history. The real Audrey, the one in the navy dress, felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful it almost buckled her knees. The humiliation, the pain, the despair, it all receded, replaced by a electrifying sense of vindication. She wasn't yesterday's news. She was the architect of a storm, and it was about to make landfall right in the middle of Jonathan Sterling's perfect world. As Daniel and the pregnant Audrey began to move gracefully into the room, drawing every eye and every camera flash with them, Jonathan finally broke from his paralysis. His face was a mask of dark fury. He pushed Victoria aside, his eyes locked on the approaching pair, and started across the ballroom floor. The confrontation was coming. The real show was just about to begin. The space between Jonathan and the approaching couple seemed to crackle with electric tension. The low hum of chatter in the ballroom had died, completely replaced by a thick, expectant silence. This was better than theater. This was a public implosion of one of the city's most prominent power couples, and no one wanted to miss a second. "What the hell is this?" Jonathan's voice was a low growl, barely controlled. He didn't speak to Daniel. His eyes, burning with a possessive fury, were locked on the pregnant woman who wore his wife's face. "Audrey, what is the meaning of this charade?" Rose stopped her expression, a perfect replica of Audrey's gentle composure, but with an undercurrent of steel her sister rarely showed. Daniel Peterson placed a calming hand on her arm, positioning himself slightly in front of her, a subtle shield. "Jonathan?" Daniel said, his tone cool and level, a direct contrast to Jonathan's barely suppressed rage. "Perhaps this isn't the time or the place." "Don't you talk to me," Jonathan snarled, jabbing a finger in Daniel's direction. "This is between me and my wife." He turned his venomous glare back to Rose. "And who is this, your new protector? After everything I've given you, you sneak around behind my back with him. And this," he gestured wildly at her pregnant belly, "you've been pregnant all this time, and you show up here with him to humiliate me." The accusation hung in the air, thick with hypocrisy. He was accusing her of humiliation moments after he had orchestrated her own. From her position by the column, the real Audrey watched her heart pounding. This was the moment of truth. Rose didn't flinch. She met Jonathan's enraged gaze with a look of profound disappointment. "You're asking me about this now, Jonathan?" she said, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of Audrey's, yet imbued with a newfound strength. "You're asking me about the baby you never noticed, the life growing for 6 months, that you were too busy, too self-absorbed, too infatuated with your projects, to even see—" The word projects was delivered with such delicate, cutting precision that it was obviously a substitute for Victoria's name. Victoria, who was now standing a few feet behind Jonathan, looked as if she'd been slapped. "I don't know what game you're playing," Jonathan seethed, taking another step forward. "But it's over. You are coming home with me. Now!" He reached out to grab Rose's arm, an act of pure primal ownership. But Daniel moved with surprising speed, intercepting his wrist. Daniel's grip was firm, unyielding. "I would advise against that, Jonathan," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. The two titans were locked in a silent battle, a tableau of old and new power. The tension was about to snap when a new voice joined the fray, calm, clear, and utterly unexpected. "He's right, Jonathan. You should let her go." Every head turned. The real Audrey had stepped out from the shadows of the marble column. She walked slowly, deliberately across the polished floor, her simple navy dress a stark contrast to her sister's vibrant green. As she moved, a path cleared before her, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. She came to a stop beside her sister, creating a surreal mirror image. The two Audreys. One visibly pregnant, radiant and defiant. The other slighter in frame, her face pale, but her eyes burning with a fire no one had ever seen in them before. Jonathan stared, his mind visibly short-circuiting. His gaze flicked back and forth between the two women. The resemblance was uncanny, but the truth was undeniable. He looked at the real Audrey's flat stomach, then at Rose's swollen belly. "What? Who?" he stammered, his rage momentarily replaced by utter bewilderment. "This," Audrey said, gesturing to her sister, "is Rose, my sister." She then looked at Daniel, "And this is Daniel Peterson, my friend." She let the simple, devastating truths land. She wasn't having an affair. She hadn't been hiding a pregnancy with another man. She had simply been forgotten. She then turned her gaze fully on her husband. The fear was gone. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound. But it was now banked by a cold, hard resolve. "The woman you allowed to be humiliated tonight, Jonathan," she said, her voice ringing with clarity in the silent room, "was your wife. The woman you ignored, the woman you so easily discarded, the woman whose pain you watched with a smile on your face. That was me." She took a small, steadying breath. "You were so busy looking for a woman who shines. You forgot that I was the one holding the light for you all these years. You were so desperate for a palace, you didn't realize you were sledgehammering the foundation of the home we built." She paused, then delivered the final devastating blow. "And yes," she said, her voice dropping, but losing none of its power. Her hand instinctively, finally protectively covering her own abdomen. "I am pregnant. I have been for 6 months. With your child, the child you never noticed, the child you were about to cast aside along with its mother, the child who will be a sterling, but will never, ever call your house a home." A collective gasp went through the room. It was a soap opera playing out in real time. Jonathan Sterling, the titan of industry, hadn't just been caught in a sordid affair, he had been exposed as a fool. A cruel, oblivious fool who didn't even know his own wife was pregnant. Jonathan's face went from red with rage to ashen white. He looked at Audrey's stomach, really looked for the first time. He saw the slight, almost imperceptible curve beneath the navy silk. A truth that had been hiding in plain sight for months. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow. A child. His heir. The one thing his legacy was missing. And he had thrown it all away. He looked from Audrey's resolute face to Rose's pitying one to Daniel's cold, contemptuous stare. He looked at the faces in the crowd, investors, rivals, friends, and saw not admiration, but disgust and mockery. In the space of 5 minutes, he had lost control of the narrative of his wife, of his entire world. Victoria Roche, seeing the palace she had designed crumbling into dust, quietly began to back away, trying to disappear into the crowd, her face a mask of panicked self-preservation. The king had been unmasked, and no one flees a falling monarch faster than a court favorite. Audrey stood tall, flanked by her sister and her friend. For the first time in a long time, she was not Jonathan Sterling's wife. She was Audrey. and she had just taken back her life. The seeds of the Gala night rebellion had been planted 3 weeks earlier in the hushed, elegant lounge of the Carlisle Hotel. Audrey, still reeling from the cold finality of her separation from Jonathan, had called the one person she knew she could trust implicitly, Daniel Peterson. They had been friends at Columbia, part of a tight-knit study group, before their lives diverged, hers into the orbit of Jonathan Sterling, his into the relentless pursuit of building Phoenix Dynamics from the ground up. They had kept in touch sporadically, a Christmas card here, a congratulatory email there, but the deep, easy camaraderie of their youth remained. Daniel had arrived within the hour, his face etched with concern. He listened without interruption as Audrey, in a quiet, halting voice, laid out the entire story. Jonathan's increasing distance, the discovery of the affair, the cold, corporate-like dismissal of their marriage, and finally the secret she had been holding so tightly, her pregnancy. When she finished, there were tears in her eyes. "I don't know what to do, Dan," she whispered. "He's going to paint me as a bitter, scorned wife. He'll use his money and his PR team to crush me. He'll turn this into my fault." Daniel's expression was grim. "He won't," he said, his voice firm. "Because you're not going to let him. You're the smartest person I know, Kat. You've just forgotten it." It was over coffee 2 days later that the plan began to form. Audrey mentioned the upcoming Metropolitan Innovators Gala. "I'm supposed to go," she said with a sigh, "for the foundation. But I can't. I can't face them all, the whispers, the pitying looks. And I know she'll be there." "Then don't go as the victim," Daniel said, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Go as the victor. We just need to change the narrative before it's even written." That's when Audrey's phone had buzzed. It was a video call from London. On the screen was her sister's bright, smiling face. "Rose," Audrey had exclaimed, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks. Rose, ever perceptive, immediately noticed her sister's strained expression. "Kat, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Hesitantly, Audrey told her everything. As she spoke, an idea wild and improbable sparked in Daniel's mind. He looked at Rose on the phone screen, the same high cheekbones, the same intelligent eyes, the same cadence in her speech. And then he noticed the loose-fitting sweater she was wearing. "Rose," Daniel interjected gently. "Forgive me for asking, but I seem to recall you and your husband were trying for a second child." Rose's face broke into a wide grin. She stood up and turned to the side, revealing a prominent baby bump. 7 months and counting, she announced proudly. Audrey stared at the screen, then at Daniel, whose eyes were now gleaming with the brilliance of a mad strategist. "No," Audrey whispered, understanding dawning. "You can't be serious." "Why not?" Daniel challenged, a smile playing on his lips. "Jonathan's world is all about optics, about perception. So let's give him a perception he can't control. Let's create an image so powerful and confusing that it shatters his narrative completely." The plan was audacious, theatrical, and utterly terrifying. Rose, an actress who could slip into a role as easily as changing a coat, would have to fly in from London, keep out of sight, and become Audrey for one night. Daniel would be her escort, leveraging his status as Jonathan's chief rival to maximize the impact. They would create an alternate reality, a what-if scenario that would play out in real time. What if Audrey hadn't been wasting away in a hotel? What if she had left Jonathan months ago? What if she was pregnant, happy, and on the arm of a better man? The goal wasn't to fool people for long. It was to create a moment of such profound cognitive dissonance that it would force everyone, especially Jonathan, to confront the truth. Rose was instantly on board. That arrogant monster! She'd fumed over the phone. He made my sister miserable for years. Oh, I'll play the part of a lifetime. Consider me. On the next flight to New York. The following 2 weeks were a whirlwind of clandestine preparations. Daniel's security team arranged for Rose's discreet arrival, booking her into a private residence under an assumed name. His personal stylist was brought in to create the perfect look for the new Audrey. The vibrant green gown was chosen specifically to symbolize life renewal and envy. Rose studied recent videos of Audrey perfecting her walk, her mannerisms, her quiet poise. Audrey's role was the most difficult. She had to attend the gala as herself, the old Audrey. She had to be the bait. She had to endure Victoria's venom and Jonathan's cruelty, knowing that every insult was just winding the spring of the trap tighter. You have to let her get to you, Daniel had instructed her gently in their last meeting before the gala. You have to look broken. The lower you are when they arrive, the higher the impact will be. Can you do it? Audrey had nodded, her stomach churning with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. For my baby, she had said, her hand on her belly. And for me. Now, standing in the wreckage of Jonathan's public image, Audrey looked at her sister and her friend. She saw the fierce loyalty in Rose's eyes and the unwavering support in Daniel's. They hadn't saved her. They had simply handed her the sword and reminded her that she knew how to wield it all along. The true brilliance of the plan was not just in its execution, but in its revelation. It exposed Jonathan not just as an adulterer, but as a man so disconnected from his own life that he couldn't recognize his own wife, couldn't fathom her inner strength, and didn't even know he was about to become a father. He hadn't just lost his wife, he had lost all credibility. The king was not just dethroned, he was revealed to have been naked all along. The aftermath of the Metropolitan Innovators Gala was a media firestorm. By the next morning, grainy cell phone videos and breathless gossip columns had painted a vivid picture of the showdown. Sterling's shocking split wife's sister rival CEO in gala drama, screamed the headline from page 6. Forbes ran a more subdued but equally damaging piece titled "A Question of Perception: Can Jonathan Sterling's Leadership Survive a Crisis of Character?" The story was irresistible. It had betrayal, a secret pregnancy, a brilliant twist, and the public humiliation of a man who seemed untouchable. Sterling Corp's stock, which was already on shaky ground due to market volatility, took a noticeable dip in pre-market trading. The board of directors, a group of stoic old-money patriarchs who valued stability above all else, were reportedly apoplectic. A leader's personal life was his own business, until it affected the bottom line. Jonathan's had just detonated a multi-million-dollar crater in their stock value. Jonathan went into damage control mode, but for the first time in his life, he was on the back foot. He released a terse statement through his PR firm, requesting privacy during a difficult family matter. He tried to call Audrey, but she didn't answer. He texted her a series of increasingly desperate messages that swung wildly from furious threats to pathetic pleas. "You've ruined me, Audrey. I hope you're happy. How could you do this with Peterson of all people? He's trying to destroy my company. I know I messed up. I was stressed. We can fix this. Think of the baby. Audrey, please. I need to see you. Our child needs its father." That last message, the sudden invocation of fatherhood, was the one that filled Audrey with a cold, clear rage. He didn't want to be a father. He wanted to leverage his child, a pawn, to salvage his reputation and his company. Meanwhile, Audrey, Rose, and Daniel had retreated to Daniel's sprawling minimalist penthouse in Tribeca, a fortress of calm amidst the storm. Rose was extending her stay, a protective older sister, by a whole 5 minutes, as she loved to remind Audrey, who refused to leave until she was sure Audrey was safe. "He's panicking," Daniel said, looking up from his tablet where he was monitoring the financial news. "The board is calling for an emergency meeting. His latest acquisition deal is rumored to be in jeopardy. You didn't just expose him, Kat. You exposed a crack in his foundation, and now all the wolves are circling." Audrey sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city that had once felt so hostile. "I didn't want to destroy his company," she said quietly. "This isn't your fault," Rose said, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "This is the consequence of his own actions. He built a house of cards on a foundation of lies. All you did was turn on a fan." In the days that followed, Audrey began to build her new life. Daniel, ever the friend, made it clear his home was her sanctuary for as long as she needed it, with no strings attached. But he also did something more important. He saw her, not as Jonathan's wife, but as the brilliant woman with a degree in art history and a keen eye for talent that she was. "I've been meaning to expand the Phoenix Foundation's charitable arts program," he said one evening over a simple dinner they'd cooked together. "We acquire art for our corporate offices worldwide, and we fund up-and-coming artists, but it lacks vision. It lacks a soul. It's run by a committee of finance guys. It needs a director. Someone with taste, with passion, with integrity." He looked at her directly. "It needs you, Kat." The offer was a lifeline, but more than that, it was a validation. It was a chance to be herself again, to use the skills and passions she had suppressed for a decade while playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. Her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jessica Finch, was thrilled with the turn of events. "Public opinion is overwhelmingly on your side," Jessica told her during a strategy call. "Jonathan's position is compromised. He's desperate. We're no longer negotiating for a fair settlement. We are dictating the terms." But as Audrey began to gain strength, the other players grew more desperate. Victoria Roach, who had been publicly discarded by Jonathan and mocked on social media as a second-rate home-wrecker, started a smear campaign. She leaked fabricated stories to tabloid blogs, painting Audrey as a cold, manipulative social climber who had been plotting with Daniel Peterson for months to orchestrate a corporate takeover. The stories were ludicrous, easily disproven, but they were a nuisance, a reminder that the world she had left was still capable of spitting venom. One headline, accompanied by a paparazzi photo of Audrey leaving Daniel's building, read, "Sterling's estranged wife moves in, with rival CEO was the baby, a honey trap." The accusation was so vile, it made Audrey physically ill. Daniel, seeing her distress, became a bulwark of protection. His security detail was enhanced, and his legal team sent a blistering cease-and-desist letter to the blog that had published the story, which was promptly retracted. "This is what they do," Daniel told her, his voice tight with anger. "When they can't win on the facts, they attack your character. Don't let her get to you. She's irrelevant." He was right. Victoria was a symptom of the disease, not the cause. The real battle was still with Jonathan. And as his desperation grew, Audrey knew the final confrontation was inevitable. He wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who, when cornered, would try to burn everything to the ground. She had to be ready. For herself, and for the new life kicking gently inside her. The final showdown was set for a place designed to project unassailable power, the 50th floor conference room of the law firm Davies, Polk and Wardwell. The room was a monument to corporate warfare, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass, that offered a panoramic, almost godlike view of Manhattan. A single slab of polished mahogany, 20 feet long, served as the table surrounded by severe leather chairs. It was a space built to intimidate, to make one feel small against the backdrop of the city's vastness and the law's immense weight. But as Audrey walked in, she felt none of that. The intimidation was a language she no longer spoke. She entered flanked by her lawyer, Jessica Finch, a woman whose calm demeanor masked a mind as sharp as a shard of glass. Audrey wore a simple but impeccably tailored, cream-colored maternity dress. It was a deliberate choice, soft but structured. It announced her pregnancy not as a vulnerability, but as her primary source of strength. She took a moment to absorb the scene. Jonathan was already there at the far end of the table, flanked by a trio of lawyers who looked like they were carved from the same expensive granite. He looked smaller in this vast room, a king confined to a chessboard. The confident charisma that had once charmed rooms and boardrooms was gone, stripped away to reveal a raw, weary tension. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a faint tremor in the hand that held his pen. The weeks of public scrutiny and private panic had clearly taken their toll. His company's stock had stabilized, but his reputation had not. The board had forced him to issue a public apology for his lapse in judgment, and had installed a new chairman, a man named Henderson, to effectively act as his warden. Jonathan had lost face, and for a man like him, that was a fate worse than financial ruin. He stood as Audrey entered, a reflex of old manners, attempting to dredge up a flicker of his former charm. "Audrey, you look, well." "I am Jonathan," she replied, her voice cool and steady. She didn't offer a smile. She and Jessica took their seats at the opposite end of the table, establishing a clear visual and emotional distance. Before Jonathan could speak again, his lead counsel, a silver-haired man named Arthur Davies, cleared his throat and began. "Miss Sterling, Audrey," he began, his voice a smooth, patronizing baritone. "We are all here today with one goal in mind, to resolve this unfortunate matter with the utmost discretion and civility. The primary concern for all parties, of course, is the well-being of the unborn child. A protracted public legal battle would be traumatic. It is in the child's best interest that we find a quiet, amicable solution." Audrey listened patiently, letting the condescending speech wash over her. It was the classic opening gambit frame, the powerful man as the reasonable party and the wronged woman as a potential source of hysteria. Jonathan waved a dismissive hand at his lawyer. "Arthur, please. Let me." He leaned forward, his elbows on the polished table, trying to create an illusion of intimacy across the vast expanse of mahogany. His eyes for the first time met Audrey's, and she saw a desperate plea in them. "Cat," he began, using the old pet name that now sounded like a violation on his lips. "I know I made a terrible mistake, a catastrophic one. There isn't a moment that goes by that I don't regret my actions, my blindness. I was a fool. I was arrogant. But none of that changes the fact that I am the father of your child. Our child." He slid a thick, leather-bound document across the table. "This is my offer, and I want you to know it comes from the heart, not from them." He gestured to his lawyers. "It gives you everything. The Fifth Avenue penthouse is yours free and clear. A lifelong tax-free stipend that will ensure you and our baby want for nothing ever. Full physical custody, of course. You choose the schools, the doctors, everything." He paused, delivering what he thought was the master stroke of his magnanimity. "All I'm asking for in return is joint legal decision-making, a father's right to have a say and a reasonable visitation schedule. And, his voice dropped, a standard non-disclosure agreement. We handle this quietly with dignity. We can still be a family cat for our child. It was a masterful performance. He was painting himself as the repentant sinner, offering her a golden cage in exchange for her silence and a permanent legal tether to his life. He wasn't giving up power. He was simply changing the currency of his control from affection to finance. Jessica Finch picked up the document, her face impassive as she began to read. But Audrey didn't need to see the fine print. She knew the poison was in the premise. "No," she said. The single word fell into the silent room with the weight of a gavel. Jonathan blinked, genuinely stunned. "No. What do you mean? No, Audrey, this is an unprecedentedly generous offer. My lawyers are advising me against it as we speak." "It's not generous, Jonathan. It's a leash," she said, her gaze unwavering and fierce. "You think you can throw money at this wound until it scars over, but you don't get it. This isn't about the money. It was never about the money." She leaned forward, her own hands now flat on the table. "You talk about the best interests of the child. Let me tell you what that really means. It means being raised with integrity. It means growing up in a home filled with honesty and respect, not secrets and payoffs. You want to talk about dignity? Was there dignity at the gala? Jonathan, was it dignified to stand by and watch your mistress tear me to shreds in front of 200 people while you smirked from the sidelines? That is the family you're offering our child. A world where cruelty is entertainment and love is a transaction. My child will not be a part of it. He or she will not be used as a prop to salvage your public image." Jonathan's face began to darken, the mask of contrition slipping to reveal the familiar rage beneath. "You're being emotional, Audrey. You're not thinking clearly." "Oh, I have never thought more clearly in my life," she countered, her voice rising with controlled power. She slid a much thinner folder prepared by Jessica across the table. "This is my offer. It is not a negotiation. It is a statement of fact. I want nothing from you. Not the penthouse, not your money, not a single dime of your lifelong stipend. I will be the sole legal and physical guardian of my child. The baby will be given my maiden name, Davenport. You will relinquish all parental rights effective immediately. You will be a biological donor, nothing more." The rage in Jonathan's eyes erupted. He shot to his feet, the leather chair scraping harshly against the floor. "You can't be serious. That's insane." "I am the father. I have rights. I will fight you in court. I'll drag your name through the mud. I'll bury you in legal fees until you have nothing left. I will own you." The threat hung in the air, ugly and raw. His lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Audrey, however, remained perfectly still, her expression almost serene. "Will you, Jonathan?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "Are you sure you want to go to war with me? Because you seem to be mistaken about who has the real power in this room." She looked at Jessica, who nodded once. Jessica placed a slim, unassuming tablet on the table and turned it to face Jonathan. "Before you threaten a war of attrition, Mr. Sterling, perhaps you should assess your own vulnerabilities." On the screen was a detailed financial ledger. It was a labyrinth of offshore accounts, shell corporations, and coded wire transfers. It meticulously documented a flow of millions of dollars siphoned from Sterling Corp's accounts over 5 years into a personal slush fund. A fund used to finance a life he had hidden from everyone from the down payment on Victoria's Soho loft to private jets for gambling trips in Macau. It was clever complex and utterly illegal. It was felony-grade corporate embezzlement. "My father was a forensic accountant, Jonathan," Audrey said softly, her voice cutting through his stunned silence. "He taught me that numbers never lie. I was going through our old joint tax returns to prepare for the divorce, and I found an anomaly, a thread. I couldn't let it go, so I kept pulling." Jonathan stared at the screen, his face turning a ghastly shade of pale. The blood drained from his face as he recognized account numbers and transaction dates. This wasn't a bluff. This was a meticulously researched indictment. The air seemed to leave his body, and he sank back into his chair, a puppet with its strings cut. A messy divorce was a society page scandal. A federal investigation into corporate fraud would mean the end of his career, the loss of his company, and quite possibly prison. Mr. Henderson and the board would crucify him. He looked up at her, his eyes hollowed out with defeat. "What do you want?" he whispered, his voice a hoarse rasp. "I've already told you," Audrey said, pushing her document forward once more. "My freedom, and my child's freedom from the poison of your world. You will sign this agreement. You will relinquish all parental rights. You will walk away and never look back. In return, this," she gestured to the tablet, "remains my private insurance policy. You can continue to run your bruised company and live in your lonely palace. But you will never, ever be a part of our lives." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. Jonathan's lawyers avoided his gaze, shuffling papers, their expressions grim. They knew a checkmate when they saw one. Slowly, as if moving through water, Jonathan reached for the pen. His signature, once a bold, confident scrawl that had authorized billion-dollar deals, was the shaky, defeated script of a broken man. He slid the signed document back across the table. It was done. Audrey stood up, her movements calm and deliberate. She gave him one last look, not of hatred, not of triumph, but of a strange, sad pity. She saw not the titan of industry, but a small man trapped in a prison of his own, making a man who had everything and ended up with nothing that mattered. She turned without another word and walked out of the conference room. She didn't look back. The elevator ride down was silent. A slow descent from the suffocating heights of her old life to the solid ground of her new one. When the doors opened to the lobby, she walked out onto the street and was met with a burst of bright city sunlight. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of freedom. Her future was no longer an epilogue to his story, but a blank page, hers to write. And as she placed a hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kick of the new life within, she knew exactly what the first chapter would be about. Strength, integrity, and a home built not of glass and steel, but of unconditional love. Audrey's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating betrayals can lead to the most profound liberations. She transformed from a silent partner in a gilded cage into the architect of her own destiny, proving that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about integrity, courage, and reclaiming your own narrative. She didn't just get even, she got free. What did you think of the incredible way Audrey and her sister turned the tables on Jonathan? Could you feel the tension in that ballroom? If Audrey's story of strength and brilliant revenge resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Let us know in the comments below what you would have done in her position. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more unforgettable stories of justice and empowerment.